In this part 1 of a part 2 series, Champion Solutions Group will present BigFix Patch CatchUp, a methodology to bring some endpoints up to production-ready baseline systems. This was based off a white paper by IBM. We'll start by looking at a setup that could be anybody's BigFix installation, with a server, remote offices, and relays. As we all know, content, or new fixlets, which represent patches, will be given to us by the fixlet server as cloud content from the IBM source. As our server pulls in this content at least once a day, we can start having this content run around our systems through the relay architecture to be able to define and understand what patches are required in our environment. Note that nothing is changing in your environment. It's simply asking questions and they're returning the answer of applicable patches. The end result is the BigFix system, within a few minutes, will be able to give us reports on our environment, showing us which patches are required on all the endpoints in our environment from a graphical and a reporting standpoint. From here, we're going to take this information and start determining what patches to roll out in the environment. Once we are armed with the information of what patches are applicable for our environment, best practices dictate that we'd create a baseline, either monthly or whatever your patching cycle is, of all the patches we wish to test, along with any other configuration or custom things in our environment we wish to push out via the baseline. And along with that, with best practices, also rebooting systems, since a lot of systems will require a reboot once patches are deployed. We of course want to follow best practices and test these on test endpoints before going to production. After we do that, we will need to make required changes. Sometimes we will modify the default fixlets. Once that has been completed, we're going to take our next step and work with change management to actually push this out to production, which we can see on the left-hand side. We're actually making changes within our change management time window. Everybody will work this slightly different. However, normally this baseline will be active, at least for the month or at least to the end of this patching cycle. Once that is completed, however, we usually turn off this baseline, stopping the distribution to the endpoints, and retire this baseline, usually deleting it or just making it inactive. Following best practices, we repeat this cycle on each and every patch window or cycle. That could be monthly or whatever your patch window is. You're going to find which fixlets are required in patches. You're going to create, test, and deploy your fixlets to a test and then production site. And obviously after the patch window is ended, you're going to stop this process, deleting the baseline, and repeating the process again each and every month or whatever your cycle for change management window is. And even though this is best practice, there's an inherent problem with this scenario, which we're going to show you next. The problem really is with new endpoints. These could be new desktop systems that were just imaged. They could even be laptops. Maybe somebody was out on maternity leave for an extended period of time, and they missed various patch windows. Even VMware servers that you boot up and clone off a gold image. If you're not updating your gold image at least weekly, these systems simply don't match your production environment. And these systems, as they're created as endpoints, can certainly be applicable to the monthly baseline that you have running. As endpoints in the environment, they'll certainly be applicable to this baseline and pull in all those configurations and patches. But what about the previous baselines, the ones from last month, last quarter, even last year? These systems simply will not match your production environment. How can we run these old baselines on these new endpoints without affecting all the other production systems? Our solution will be following the white paper from IBM, and will simply create a custom site inside the BigFix enterprise and assign these new endpoints to the site, separating them from the production systems. Now we have a custom site with these endpoints, and they'll be operated by a local user inside this site. We'll run our normal baseline like we normally do, pushing that out to our production environment, letting those machines run that baseline. But once that baseline has completed, instead of deleting it or making it inactive, we're actually going to copy this baseline to our custom site. And we're going to repeat this process for every patch cycle. So our custom site will then contain baselines and patches going back last month, last quarter, or even years. These baselines will be activated and only running on endpoints that are subscribed to this CatchUp site. And as these endpoints run through all these older baselines, they will slowly catch themselves up to the production environment. And when they do, they'll automatically pull themselves out of the CatchUp site and rejoin the rest of the systems in production. So the next question is, how does this all work? Well, here at Champion Solutions Group, we've created the fixlets, analysis, and even reports. Even made this process installable in your environment. But before we show you how to do that, we're going to go over again the process of how this works in detail. This solution consists of various custom fixlets, two of which run out of the master action site. They're the gatekeepers that allow an endpoint into the custom site, and again the gatekeeper that pulls the endpoint out of the site when it's complete. Inside of the site, some other custom fixlets are running that allow the endpoint to keep track of how many reboots it's done, how many fixlets are still applicable, and it will run its patching cycle, rebooting as often as needed until the endpoint is ready to be taken out of this custom site. If we walk through this in detail, step 1 will be to actually enter the CatchUp site. This is done from a fixlet and a master operator site, which tags the machine that it should enter this site. Once it's going to enter the site, we're actually going to do a couple unique things to the endpoint, which one is to increase the CPU. As we all know, BigFix by default only uses 2% of the CPU. By increasing the amount of CPU BigFix can use, we can walk through these patches and run them much quicker than normal. Step 3 will be where the endpoint will actually start applying its patch cycle, running through all the old baselines and configuration settings, applying them as quick as possible to the endpoint, bringing this system closer and closer to production-ready state. Also within this site is the ability to reboot the endpoint as often as needed, since many patches do require a reboot. During this entire time, the system is constantly checking to determine how many reboots the endpoint went through, all sorts of analysis of how many patches were deployed, and when it's applicable for this endpoint to actually be removed from this site. Once it is, the CPU will be decreased, a flag will set to say that it's caught up to production, and it will actually remove itself from the site automatically. Let's take one more look at how this will work from a graphical standpoint. So, number 1, the endpoints get subscribed to our custom CatchUp site. Step number 2, they'll start doing their applicable patches in their patch cycle in step 2 and 3. Step 4, they'll be determined if they should be removed from the site. Basically, did all patches get applied? And if so, step 5 will happen where the CPU will get decreased. They'll be marked for removal from the site, and they'll automatically be pulled out of the site and pulled back into the production environment. And that was going to conclude part 1 of these 2-part series. Please watch our next series as we get into detail of how this works in a live environment.